So first, I would like for anyone who is currently serving on the vestry, or who is an officer, or who is the chair of our endowment committees and business group, to come forward and just join us for just a moment. So vestry members, officers, come stand with me for a minute. Look how many of you are here. That's awesome. So the first thing that I want to show you and tell you is that these are on your vestry. These people are on your vestry. Yay! They're serving! And the leadership group, and there's Abby. Abby is part of the broader leadership group, because the leadership group for us is composed of the vestry, myself, the officers like the treasurer and the clerk of the vestry, who takes all our minutes and gets those to you and to us. And also Abby, I've asked her to sort of be a part of our leadership team, because she is the chair for both our endowment committee right now and our business group, which is responsible for our day-to-day operations. So boy, have they been awesome as they have emerged. So these are the folks. If you memorize their faces, even if not their names, even their names are vague because they may not be wearing the name tags 24/7. These are the folks that I'm going to refer to a little bit more, I'm going to talk about today, that you can find and seek out. These are your leaders, not just me. You might not always feel comfortable coming to me with an issue for whatever reason. You might feel more comfortable coming to them. But they will bring your concerns to the group. And we're going to be doing a lot of listening sessions, a lot of visioning sessions in the coming year. And these are the people who are going to be making time to hear you and talk with you. So thank you so much for coming up, and thank you for serving this one good thing. We don't have to have our two wardens with us, I would have highlighted them. Our junior warden is Melody Oxley, and she's usually here. I might have worn her out yesterday. We had a retreat yesterday. And then our senior warden actually comes to the 8 o'clock service, and that is Bob Moore. So your vestry has asked and invited those two people to serve, senior warden Bob Moore and Mel Oxley as our junior warden. So that means that Mel works very closely with our buildings and grounds team, and she's served in that position before. She's very suited for it. She has a background in real estate, and she currently is a Coldwell Banker agent. So she gets property in a very important way, and the maintenance of property. And then Bob Moore has kind of been with us at one point in his life, and then went away as a very busy person, and now in his retirement is back and able to engage more fully again. So we're very grateful for him and his retirement as he sees it. As he said at the retreat yesterday, he feels that he's called to serve out of his retirement. He wants to serve. So we are very blessed with their talents, and I feel that we're also very blessed with the people who are in our pews. The people in our pews who I just, encounter every time I get the opportunity to be with you, to talk with you, individually or in groups. It is such a wonderful diversity of background, a wonderful diversity of life experience and perspective and age. I'm very pleased with how we have really brought in, we're very diverse in that as well. So I'm very pleased with that. You might know or not that we currently have like 57 children enrolled in all our various programs for young people. And that is something to celebrate. This community has made a concerted effort in collaboration with the Bishop's Office and the College of Congregational Development to really work and grow that program with us. We've gotten grants from the diocese, and we have made contributions in part out of our endowment programs to be able to create a more broad-based education program, which is why when you see that big slip of paper about all that's being offered in Lent, that has something for everybody at all ages in there. including the things that are even happening today, the one that happened at 9 o'clock and the one that I'm going to do at noon. All of these things are because we are feeling driven by the Spirit. And where is the wilderness? The wilderness, I think, is this world. It really is. And very parallel to the time in which Jesus was born and raised and lived his adult life under the Roman Empire. He really experienced what it was to know that there was violence in the world. He could see it in his own streets. He could experience it within the empire. In the whole known world of the time, war was a way of life, living under military rules. It was a different age. It wasn't like you could have freedom of speech, like we enjoy here and now, that not everybody does around the world. And the time in which Jesus lived, that can very readily get you killed. Speech was so threatening that that's what Jesus did that got him killed. As a seditionist, a person speaking against the state. But did he ever say anything against the state that we have? In fact, there were other times, like the whole give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, that he actually said, you give the state what he thinks is important. But you give to God what God is telling us is important. So he never actually spoke against, but was still perceived as so threatening. Because what he spoke in so many ways was about peace and justice and reconciliation and the integration of the diversity of this world, the seeing of the poor and helping them, the seeing of the hungry and feeding them, being driven by the Spirit out of his experience of baptism to preach in the wilderness of the world that wasn't ready or willing to see, to listen, to give, because it was so bound up in a culture and a national and international experience of violence against people. Is that not parallel in this time when our world feels very small because of the way that we can communicate in it now? We hear it almost instantaneously when violence is happening. And that is what we hear again and again, whether you're on Facebook, or you're on Twitter, or you're on Instagram, or you're watching the news, or listening to the radio. It's all always there. And in fact, there seems to be an increasing awareness and concern that accompanies that this is becoming the major drumbeat of the global life. The question is not when will there be peace, it seems to be where's the next hotspot. And people are waiting to hear what's the next problem and trauma for the people. This is particularly complex in places like Africa. We have the Boko Haram, who's basically kidnapping children, and forcing them into marriages against their will. And just perpetrating enormous atrocities. We have the experience that's been generational between Jerusalem and Palestine that flares up. And what's happening is generations on both sides of that equation are knowing intimately what that is to be raised in a war zone. And this concerns the whole international community about how to respond to that. Because we understand what's happening by all of that exposure as we radicalize our young people. We radicalize people to extremes, young and old sometimes, who feel that the only effective way that they could possibly respond is to join that violence and become part of that war in whatever way they can. Much of it is identified as a sore lack of listening, of empires doing what empires do. Imperialism kind of coming in and trying to have influence over the world stage. And that because the world is concerned about what's going on. How to be part of the solution without becoming part of the problem. We're not always very good at that. We can, in fact, make it worse, and at times we have. And we have ISIS coming out of an experience of basically being disregarded, their feeling of disregard, led to radicalization. Doesn't make it right. But now we live in a world where the kinds of things that we're seeing on the news are more outrageous than we could possibly have imagined even 20 years ago, or 30 years ago. But it cycles. There isn't a civilization, including our own, that hasn't encountered history of violence. That seems to be part of how the world and communities and cultures grow. What I hear is the invitation in the gospel and from St. Paul for the human community to mature beyond that place as a community. For the world to begin to understand that the only way that we can change any of that is to begin by what Christ says is the conversion of the individual human heart. That takes our participation in that, our willingness to engage, even how we engage one another, even how we have conversations that are difficult and challenging. One of the things the Vestre has talked about is how we long to be able to bring programs and examples of even how to engage conflict in daily life, in our relationships with the people that we love, in our relationships with our families, in our relationships with our church community. How to create a safe environment and tool everyone for having difficult conversation. Because if we can't do it here in the faith community, where we hope that we embrace the diversity of perspective and thought, if we can't figure out how to do dialogue in a healthy way, in a way that challenges us to new places, and hear all voices, then how can we possibly do that outside of our walls? So your Vestre is, I think in the coming year, you're going to hear lots of opportunity to engage dialogue and vision development and problem solving, not just problem recognition. That's really easy to do, right? Oh, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. You can all create a list. We're all pretty aware of what we may need to change. But this being driven by the Holy Spirit, do something new out of baptism applies to us all. The problem solving and visioning for the new requires all of the baptized. It can be easy to just point to the leadership that was lined up here a few moments ago and say, oh, that's all on you now. That's right, you're elected. You're not going to worry about that anymore. But our baptism drives us to live into the reality of the world and make it transformative to a place where we can enjoy the freedoms and the peace and the love that God would have us know. In this whole story of Noah, it's almost like the human community had such an experience of violence that was their understanding of how God must be behaving. When bad things happen, it must be because we have a violent God. Because that's our experience in the world. But then we have the story of Noah. And God opts out of that game completely. And says, I'm not doing that. If I ever did, or you ever thought that about me, that's not what I'm doing. When you experience suffering or challenge or violence, it is not being generated by our God. It's being generated by people. People who must engage transformation of the self, transformation of small and intimate communities, even families. in order to be able to be transformative in the world. That's hard and challenging work, and it applies to us all. So I really ask you that in the year ahead of us, as your leadership works to try to tool us all to do our own visioning process for this community, our visioning process for our life together will require tools of listening and communicating in healthy ways. And we'll work on those together as well. It will require the silent people who say, I'm introverted, don't talk to me, to actually talk out loud or write, if that's more comfortable, about what you need and would like to see in the church. But not just that, what you will contribute to the church from the gifts of the Spirit that God has given to you. All the pastoral care needs of the 357 people who are the baptized members of this congregation cannot be met just from here. But from all of us, when I send out those kind of wellness updates or pastoral care updates, all of us responding. I don't always know, sadly, when people are in need, or when they're ill, or when they've been hospitalized. One person I found out was hospitalized 10 days after they'd already been there. I wish I was that psychic, but I'm not. I need people to tell me when you know, to conform to office, and then to say, I see a need, and here's what I can do. Is that helpful? Because ultimately, the response to the Spirit of our baptism is exactly what the same Lord has said, to service. Even if it is simply being part of making phone calls to people, phone calls for justice to our legislatures, phone calls to the ill so they feel connected, phone calls for prayers, phone calls of information and support. We can and have in us the capacity God has given us to transform this world, but it begins with us. We must do that work here in creating a safe place and the tooled place to do that here, so that our experience of the wilderness of the world will not leave us without the true knowledge that God is present to us. That, I think, is the greatest temptation that Christ experienced in the desert. It all comes down to, does he believe and have the experience of God being present to him in his suffering, in his questioning, in his despair of the world around him, in his despair of John being arrested and killed, and knowing this could come to nothing. It is only out of the belief, not being tempted to forget or disbelieve, that God is present even now. And is present in each of you. You were baptized and live in the wilderness of the world. Let us rejoice and be glad that we have found one another.